Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. The new bride is making her first dinner for her husband, and she tries her hand at her mother's brisket recipe. She cuts off the roast the way her mother always did. The husband thinks the dish is delicious, but says, "Why do you cut off the ends? That's the best part." She answers, "That's the way my mother always did it." The next week they go to the mother's house and she prepares the famous brisket recipe, again cutting off the ends. The young bride is sure that she's missing some kind of vital information, so she asks her mother, "Why do you cut off the ends?" "I don't know," says the mother. "It was part of the recipe, I guess. That's the way your grandma always made it." Everyone is suitably bewildered at this unusual practice. It seems that the only way they can solve this mystery is to show up at Grandma's place. And so they do. Inevitably, the question comes up, Grandma, we love your brisket recipe, but why do you cut off the ends every time?" Grandma is puzzled for a few seconds. Then she says, "Are you still cutting off the ends? The only reason why I did that was because we didn't have much money back then and I had only one pan. And cutting off the ends was the only way that the brisket would fit in the pan." It's the fit, isn't it? It's the fit that we're looking for when we write our stories. We're not entirely sure if the story is too long or too short, and we're definitely worried that it is too boring. Hence, we sit down and we edit our story. But it is important to know what to look for. There is no point in just hacking away the best bits. And yes, there are things that you need to watch out for every single time. And we'll cover 3 of those. Here are the 3 things that I look for whenever I'm editing a story. The first is over-description. The second is, I did this and I did that. And the third are excessive numbers. Let's start out with the first one, which is over-description. And right at the start, I want to thank everybody on the storytelling course who generously allowed me to use their stories. So this first story is by Steve Keller. And it goes like this. I was 17 years old. I just bought my first car, a 1971 Chevrolet Chevelle. My friend Jude also owned an older car. It was a 1963 Chevrolet Impala. His car was faster. He'd win any race against me. So that's a very small excerpt there. But is all of that description relevant? And it's impossible to tell unless you read the entire piece. However, this was a race. Generally, adults don't race, but 17-year-old boys are more likely to do so. So why does all the description of the cars matter? Despite the Chevrolet Chevelle being a later model, which is 1971, the Chevrolet Impala, 1963, was faster. So what's happening here is you're setting up the story. You're setting up the race where one is older but is definitely going to be faster, and the other person with the newer car wants to win the race. So there is a setup, there is this tension, and therefore the description of the cars matter. However, when we write our stories, we tend to read all these books and novels and even listen to podcasts where they talk about the house being old and leaky with broken stairs near a highway. And, well, we all like that description. It's probably something that you would do in a book. You would do in a podcast that's purely storytelling, even in a presentation, the article format, which is where most of us tend to live, is not that forgiving. Does the leaky bit matter? What about the broken stairs? Is the noise a factor in the story? When you're creating your story, it might be a good idea to write down all the descriptions that come to your head, but then to go back and get rid of anything that doesn't directly apply to the story. And there's a very good reason why you're doing that. An article has about 800 words, 1200 words, and all of those additional descriptions that are doing absolutely nothing are not doing absolutely nothing. They're taking up valuable space. More importantly, it doesn't matter. When you get rid of it, it doesn't change the story even a tiny bit. And here is a second story, but first let me give you the first line of that story. A good friend in Budapest, Hungary, had just lost her father a few months ago. After the usual messages back and forth via chat, Renuka decided to send her some chocolate, a note, and a paper origami crane. What's relevant in those lines? It's hard to tell, isn't it? The first line seems to be pretty fine, but the second line seems to have a lot of detail, and it's impossible to tell what is useful and what is not. Should the chocolate be dropped? Perhaps not. What about the note? Or the origami crane? It seems to be important, but it's hard to tell. And that is what happens when we tell our stories. We can't necessarily tell what's relevant and what's not. But wait, let's start with the outline. And here's what the outline looks like. A friend who lives in Hungary loses her father. Renuka has a long back and forth on chat. Then several weeks later, Renuka decides to send a chocolate, a note, and an origami crane. However, she doesn't hear back from the friend, so she messages her. No chocolate has arrived here, says the friend, and many more weeks pass and the chocolate seems to have disappeared. Suddenly, in the first week of May, the package arrives. The lost chocolate is finally home. So is the note and the origami crane, and everyone is happy. Now, what do you think? Was the note and the origami crane relevant? And what about the first week of May? It seems pretty odd, and it's detail for the sake of filling in space, isn't it? Okay, let's change the story a bit and see if there's any difference. A friend who lives in Hungary loses a father. Renuka has this long back and forth on chat, and then several weeks later she decides to send a chocolate, a note, and an origami crane. However, she doesn't hear back from a friend, so she messages her. No chocolate has arrived here, says the friend. Many more weeks pass and the chocolate seems to have disappeared. Suddenly, in the first week of May, the package arrives. However, before the chocolate gets to her, the friend's daughter comes home from school. And at school, the daughter has been given a gift by her friend, which she then brings home and gives to her mother. What is that gift? It's a tiny origami crane. The same day the package arrives with the chocolate, the note, and the origami crane. The friend is delighted. Everyone is happy. Now you see how that detail mattered? It closed that loop, so the detail makes a difference. If you just put in, oh, there was an origami crane, there was something else, and there was another thing, well, that doesn't make any difference. So it's not relevant. Even adding in the detail like, oh, it was sent in the month of May, well, that's not relevant. If May is a particularly hot month and something happened to the chocolate, maybe it melted, yes, then it would be relevant. However, to just throw in a month into the outline would be pointless. If you're going to do that, you may as well put in more detail. You might as well say, at 3:34 p.m. and 36 seconds, the package arrived on the 4th of May, and then you put in the year. But we wouldn't do something so stupid because the detail isn't relevant. So if it isn't relevant, then let it stay in the first outline. Because you can do that. You can make a first outline and then a second outline very quickly without looking at the first one. And what you'll find is a lot of the detail gets stripped off. So that's the first part that I'm looking for whenever I edit a story. I'm looking for those details that make the story, and those details that are just thrown in because you read a novel or someone went on and you just picked up that little bad habit that we need to get rid of. And that bounces us right into the second part of today's episode, which is, I did this and I did that. Yes, it's just like it sounds. It's a sequence of actions that you took one after the other, which is, I did this, then I did that, then I did that. And while some of it is very relevant, a lot of it is just you walking the reader around the scene for no good reason. And this is from Akash Thakkar. So let's take a look from Akash's excerpt. When I was 15 years old, I was in high school taking a chemistry class. I was generally bored with 99% of my classes, but thankfully, I at least shared this class with my best friend Mike. One day we headed to the lab to do an in-class assignment. Our teacher told us to pair up, so of course Mike and I teamed up to do the work. That day's assignment was just a simple titration where we had to dip one solution into the other. As we all paired off and claimed various lab spaces, the teacher went round and handed out the instructions for the assignment, which listed out 8 sequential steps. Do this, do that, and then boom, you're done. Well, you see it, don't you? And he's even put in do this, do that. And essentially, that's really what's happening. The second paragraph is when we start walking. We head to the lab. We do an in-class assignment. We pair off. We claim various lab spaces. The teacher tells us to pair up. Mike and I teamed up to do the work. We had a titration experiment. We had to drip once. It's so tedious just reading it out. And if you're wondering, is that boring? Well, you don't have to wonder. We know it's boring. None of that was relevant to the story. Because the story is really about how Mike and Akash decide to do an experiment even while the teacher is speaking. The teacher gives the class the okay. Everyone starts to do the stuff. But these guys, they're like, oh, we did it. We're done. We're done with the experiment. All of that walking through didn't help, did it? And you'll find that when you're writing a story, you'll start to talk about loading all the belongings on the van, and they didn't fit well, and did this and did that. We went to the foyer, through the swimming pool, looking for my friend, and it's all blah, 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 blah. We don't need it. Which is what I do when I'm editing a story. I look for the blah, blah, blah. I went, did this, did that, did this, did that. It's boring. Get rid of it. We started this podcast with the excessive detail problem, which is it was a hot sunny day and the red window was flapping uncontrollably in the breeze. We don't need that. And then we went to the second one, which is I did this and I did that and walked here and walked there, all blah, blah, blah. But the third one, and this appears not only in stories but in articles, but we're talking about stories here, and this is excessive numbering or excessive numbers and names. Let's find out what it's all about. Earlier in these articles, we learned that Steve was 17 and that his 1971 Chevy was no match for his friend's 1963 model when it came to speed. But what if Steve started to give us some more numbers, like how fast it went or how much fuel it drank? And at that moment, we'd feel overwhelmed with numbers. Which takes us to Jonathan's story. Here's what Jonathan has to say. And he's talking about Ethereum, which is like Bitcoin. So it's already technical for most of the people that don't understand it. But listen to it just as a number thing, and you'll see it's very confusing. I know, I'm setting it up. I'm saying it's confusing, but you'll find it confusing anyway. Here we go. When I first started investing in NFTs, I made one of the most common mistakes that all newbies make. I kept buying pieces in different collections, hoping that one would be a winner. After losing thousands of dollars, I realized that my strategy was flawed. That's when I decided to pick up one collection and focus on it. After doing much research, the Littles project looked like a winner. There was a lot of competition for these NFTs, and the price was getting more expensive every day. As I did more research, I realized that there was less competition for the more rare pieces, which makes sense since they cost 5 times the entry-level pieces. Are you still there? Are you still listening to the story? Because NFTs are a new concept for a lot of people. But let's say that you're aware of what it stands for and you can make it through the first paragraph. The second paragraph brings in a name called Littles Project. So far, we're trundling along nicely until he swings down the corner to the third paragraph, and then it's complete chaos, which is, I gathered up 4 Ethereum and then began to buy the most rare pieces I could find. They were called the Mystics, and there were only 140 of them in a 10,000 piece collection. My first 2 Mystics cost 1 Ethereum each, and then while I was on the hunt for another, I discovered an even more rare mystic, the Spirit Mask, and I have to give up because he goes on to 140 masks, and there are 15 Spirit Masks, and then there's 3 Ethereum, and there's 2 Ethereum, and you see what's happening here. Even if you know all of the Ethereum and the Bitcoin and the Mystics and all of the names, you have this avalanche of figures and names, and if we make a list, it's like 4 Ethereum Mystics, 140 pieces, 10,000 piece collection, 2 Mystics costing 1 Ethereum Spirit Mask. Out of the 140, there were only 14, least expensive. 3 were there. I had 3 Ethereum and then 2 left, and then I had to buy 1. That's the problem. Your story, your article has to have the least number of names and numbers. And you know how you feel when you read a novel and then suddenly Christine, Chris, Mark, and Joanne and Francesca all show up. And they show up in quick succession. Now, let's make it really hard for you and bring in not just Christine, Mark, Joanne, and Francesca, but Raghunath or Sivaramakrishnan, who is from Thiruvananthapuram, and suddenly you don't know what's happening. And that's the feeling that most readers get when they're reading your story, and you have all of these numbers and all of these names that pop up, and they're very relevant to you, but not relevant to the reader at all. In Jonathan's story, he didn't just put in all those details of numbers and names, but then he did I did this and I did that as well. He walked you through what he bought and what he did and what he sold, and it could be summed up in a few lines, and the feeling of him being stuck would still remain. You would still create that tension in the story. And yes, it's hard work. Yes, we like to roll out all the details, especially the numbers and the names. And it takes up space on your page, and it confuses your reader, and it's irrelevant. It too has to go. It has to be chopped off at the ends, or at least be changed. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. So what did we cover today? We covered 3 things that you definitely need to edit out of your story. And that is the first thing, and this is the most important of all, is the description. That hot summer night where the window is flapping. No. Please don't put in those details. Even when you hear them on other podcasts, even when you're reading the novels, be sure to remember you are there to write the story that then connects to the article, and you're not into this massive description. So that's the first thing that has to go in your second outline. You make the first outline, then do the second outline. The second thing you have to get rid of very quickly is I did this and I did that. And the third thing, and this is the one thing that you can do today, go through your stories and get rid of excessive numbers and names. Because that's the easiest thing of all to do. You can get rid of excessive numbers and names instantly. You can see them. The other ones, maybe it's difficult. You don't always know which details are important, and maybe somebody else has to look at them. But numbers and names, you can see them. So that's the one thing you can do today. Get rid of the excessive numbers and names. Just remember one more thing. I've said it before, but editing isn't about taking a machete to your story. It's not about chopping stuff. Instead, it's about relevance. If the details are relevant, they stay. If not, they go. And with that, let's find out what's happening in psychotactics land. Some of you might have missed the article writing course home study, and well, that's not available until October, so make sure this time that you get it. But what's available in June is the startup course. So if you go to psychotactics.com/startup, then you will get on the waiting list. Now, what's interesting about this startup series is that it's about the psychology of starting up. So you learn how to look for a customer, you learn why a product that you already have is better than something that you invent. So go and have a look at it, and you'll see it at psychotactics.com/startup. And that's pretty much it for us at Psychotactics. We hope you enjoy this. If you enjoy this podcast, tell me why you like it. Is it the music? Is it the stories? What is it that you like? And if you don't like it, well, that's even better for me, because I don't know if you know this, but we used to make a lot of mistakes, and people would write in from time to time. They don't write in because they think, oh, they're going to offend me. You're not going to offend me. Write in and tell me, and who knows, maybe you'll get a chocolate and an origami crane as well. I'll say bye for now and see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.